Thank you guys for coming to our panel. I'm Caroline. I'm moderating this discussion. I make a comic called Poo-poo. It's really serious. And I am so happy to be here at CXC. It's one of my favorite fests. I really like Columbus. Everyone here is so sweet. And I am joined here today with Sam Szabo and Pidge. Sam Szabo is a beautiful cartoonist from the North Shore of Massachusetts. She has self-published dozens of comics for so many years, including Girl Hell, Momix, and Comics Will Break Your Balls Parts 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. Yep. Maybe three soon. Mm-hmm. I would love to see it. Her book, Enlightened Transexual Comix, is published by Silver Sprocket, and it came out last year. She is a special guest. Yeah.
Guys, nice to be here.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I was
Okay.
scared that the mask. All right. Okay.
Pidge is the artist and educator behind the Ignatz Award-nominated comic Infinite Wheatpaste. The self-published series has been ongoing since 2016, with Avery Hill set to be publishing the collection of the first 9 issues into the book. And she currently resides in beautiful Colorado. Her hobbies include swearing and snowboarding. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you guys. I think that self-publishing comics is really fun, and having complete DIY control of a project is very important, and I personally think really enriching. And since you're two people whose ongoing series and multiple publications have been self-published, and then now you're both also working with publishers on top of that with some of them. I don't know. I feel like it makes sense for us to all chat.
Yeah, totally.
And with the theme of this being, magical realism, sort of, in comics, right?
Mm-hmm. And surrealism.
And conflating and contracting and whatnot. I don't know. I thought it could be fun for you guys to first talk about your influences, and then we could segue into how that then translates to your projects. So Pidge, what are some of your major influences with your work?
Well, I think for me, I'm just constantly reading, and I love comics. Fundamentally, that's, I feel like, my first language was just following my brother around and trying to get in his short box. And so I still have a love for those old 90s pulpy comics. And I don't know if that's the well from which I draw, but finding out that there are all these independent comics really brought me back to my first love. So clearly I love Love and Rockets. But just any of those, Chris Ware, Charles Burns, I'm just so excited by getting to see somebody's different vision of the world. And I think that's why comics are such an interesting and intimate art form, because you're not just reading what somebody wrote, and you're not just seeing their image, you're seeing their entire perspective. The way they choose to draw something shows you how they see that world, those big style differences. So I like to look back as far as Harriman or Walton Skeezix, Kniff. I love all comics, and it's a problem at my house trying to store them. So
IKEA it's got you.
Yeah, I gotta give it that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like piles in my room now.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
When it comes to Love and Rockets, do you have a favorite storyline in that series? Because similar to yours, you know, it's so expansive. There's so many characters, and you really get to watch them grow up with the years, which I feel like you get to with yours as well. So, is there any direct one that's maybe your favorite or the most, the one you've kept up with the longest?
Okay. So I keep parsing out Jaime's stuff because I did something very unfortunate to myself, which was I read most of Beta's stuff like all at once, and it put me into, like, you know, just weeping by myself. Unfortunately, my partner was not home, and like needing to drink a cup of tea. I think Human Dystastrophism is my favorite. I just love just even the outlines and like the way it's drawn, the ambiguity. I love in Palomar where it's real and not real, and I won't get into my theories, but I think that the way my mind works is I can live in this reality and everything can be exactly as we all are seeing it, and we can agree on those terms. But I also find myself falling into like a complete suspension of disbelief where everything is real if you think it too. And that's what I really love about what Jaime and Beto do. It's the devil and it's not the devil. It's the spirits and it's not the spirits. Everything is explainable, but that other thing that you have an inclination of being there also is. And it's like, you get to live in this real world, but if you see a door and you didn't notice it and you've been passing the same spot, and you have that thought that like, oh, that's a magic door, that's real too. And I just like to live in that permanent suspension of disbelief. So I think that's what's really beautiful about those comics to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like kind of what you were saying with like the unknown in the character, right? Like, you, even if you were to just pick up a volume and you don't know what happened before it and you don't know what's going to happen after it, you know that something did happen, you know, like they're not the types of characters that aren't written where you're like, oh, I know everything there is to know about this character, you know. And I feel like the same can be said for some of your, like for all of your characters, really. And it makes the reader just want to know more, right? Like, or at least me, when I'm reading stuff. But
or like I think Palomar exists in this place. It's kind of like Fiddler's Green, or if you haven't read Dylan Horrocks' Hicksville. To me, those are all places that don't exist, but they are. And they are because you thought them, and they are because they're places you keep visiting. And the Billy Ireland is so much Hicksville to me. It's like every comic that ever was ended up there. And every time I leave Columbus, I like shouldn't do this to myself, but I start like looking for homes because I just love it so much that I felt like I found real Hicksville.
And the homes are cute.
Yeah, that's true.
Really
and it's so much cheaper. It's
that, but, you
totally.
know, it does feel like kind of a magical place every time I go to and see everything. And I feel like there's always something at the Billy that I've never seen before in my life and didn't even know existed. And then I just get so wrapped up into it. But I don't know. What have you seen at the Billy that you're like, I know.
It's too much.
It's such a basic bitch answer, but like the Calvin and Hobbes. I cry every time. Every time I have to look.
There's a lot of whiteout. It looks good.
Yeah, it's so
good.
weird. It's like seeing the zipper on God's negligee. It's crazy. Like, I can't believe he uses whiteout.
It's
But
like
also, it makes sense.
But there's everybody's
Like, how can you
like,
not?
I don't know.
I don't know, man. It's just weird that it's real.
Right.
It's weird that he's a real guy. Anyway.
What are some of your influences?
Damn, dude, that's... Yeah, great question. I mean, my reflexive answer is always like Linda Berry, I think, just across the board in terms of her approach to just physically, I think you can see a lot in sort of like the really expressive and scratchy, scribbly lines, but also as a sort of her like approach to, like blending biography and fiction, like in a very kind of grounded way. I feel like this whole prior to this book, I really never really identified as a surrealist or a magical realist. I've been like a pretty hardcore autobio gal. What I refer to in the books is like, good old fashioned, boring, pathetic autobio. So I have my own set of influences from there, like John Porcellino. We were talking about self-publishing earlier. A lot of the real like nitty gritty Perzine guys of the 90s, I think, are huge influences on me. But for sure, I've always really liked the more out there weirdo surrealist type crap, and I was certainly like reaching for those influences when I worked on my new book in a way that I hadn't in earlier works. Like, not to like totally derail this question with another question, but I feel like it's when I'm thinking of influences, I can't help but think about it. Like, the difference between surrealism and magical realism, which would have been a really smart thing for me to Google before I sat on a panel about it. But I do think that these are really interesting, like kind of overlapping valences, but they're kind of different things. Like,
it's like the circular chart where there's like what are those called? The circular.
the Venn diagram.
It was like a
There you
Venn
go.
diagram. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's like I don't know.
It's a little Venny.
Yeah.
I feel like when I think of like magical realism, totally, I'm thinking Hernandez brothers, who were like a big influence on me, but maybe not quite as felt if you're like actually reading my work. But like certainly I see it in your work too, where it's very grounded in reality and magic is sort of out there, like in the margins. I think maybe some more direct influences for me would be like some of the guys of the 80s the 70s and 80s who I'd more characterized as surrealist. My number one guy is always going to be Bill Griffith and Zippy the Pinhead. The stuff that's like really avant-garde, deconstructionist, kind of like not even giving you an opportunity to find your footing, but like truly like warping your sense of reality, the kind of out there psychedelic, freaky, raw stuff. And that's the stuff I was really consuming as a kid. And I don't know how apparent that stuff really, those influences really were in my autobio work, but I really do think you can see it all here for sure. Yeah.
So I think for Bill Griffith, I should ask you the eternal question. Are we having fun yet?
Yeah.
Good. All right, me too.
You guys both use color in like a really expressive way, and I feel like in Infinite Wheatpaste and in Samantha from Sex and the City, astral projecting, I feel like the color does bring your work into kind of even more of a surrealist landscape on top of like the writing and the characters and the setting and the situations. And I know that you work with your partner as a colorist too, which is really cool. So I guess like, how do you guys like approach planning out your pages? Like knowing, do you know what you're going to like, do you thumbnail it all out? Do you kind of just go with what you think the character would do next? Like, how do you go about planning those?
You go.
Okay, yeah. Well, first of all, in regards to color, I think I'll start there. This book was my first time drawing in color pretty much ever, if you can believe that. Because I'm so like punk rock DIY or die, I have been self-publishing zines for like 15 years, and I've always pretty much, as I get a little older and like people are actually starting to pay me money for them, I've kind of upped my production values a little bit, and like also I've splurged on like nice paper or whatever. But historically, I've always been very tunnel vision about what is the cheapest way to finish, draw, and print this and distribute it. And that ethos, well, there's pros and cons, but it's, I I think it was very instrumental in my development, and it's often like, I think it's an approach I recommend to anybody who's maybe like earlier on in their comics journey. You just want to get it out there, and it's tough if nobody's buying your shit. So I mean, most of my stuff was made on a Xerox machine. A few years ago, I upgraded to a risograph, which is how I originally started, but I'm still generally just doing single color prints because I'm just trying to get the thing out, Yeah. There's a Poison Pill or critically acclaimed anthology. Anyway, sorry, I'm off on another tangent. So I started drawing these comics from Enlightened Transexual Comix with no intention of publishing a book. At the beginning of the pandemic, at a time when I was like really losing my mind. More on that later, but I was basically like, I'm gonna die. I'm probably never gonna get to print another comic, so like I might as well just like indulge and like color in my pictures because it feels good. And around that time, I found these Tombow pens that I really liked because I felt like they kind of like preserved the fidelity of like my childlike scrawl style vision of comics. They look like crayons kind of, but they're actually they're translucent watercolor style brush pens that the Tombow makes. They're fairly cheap and they come in all these variety packs. So I had a bunch of them lying around my apartment that I'd just been playing with. I started coloring, and then about halfway through this thing, I started talking to Silver Sprocket about publishing, and they were like, yeah, we'll print it. And I was like, oh, if you're printing it, I'm just going to keep coloring these. And now I'm kind of back to doing black and white because I'm back to self-publishing. But working in color was a lot of fun. I was really scared to because I don't have any formal art training. I don't know anything about color theory. I think part of the reason the colors are so good in this book is because I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm mostly just looking for like what colors are going to clash. Like I use secondary colors, like a lot of greens and purples kind of made my head hurt. And I was like, I want to hurt everyone's heads.
I feel like there's a lot of like green and red too, which
yeah,
is nice.
Yeah, totally. A lot of it was just literally like what I had bought that day and was like lying around my apartment. But generally I was trying to make the biggest eyesores I could. Anyway,
it's a good strategy.
Thanks.
But for you, Pidge, since you collaborate so much on the color, do you talk to your partner about what you want on the page first, or do you let them have kind of free reign and then you're like, cool?
Combination. So I do some notes on things that are particular, and there are a lot of things I'm like, the vending machine bandit is in this episode, and nobody knows the vending machine bandit who has a night job. This is not in the comic. This person has a night job, and they unplug vending machines as they go through town in a passive aggressive gesture to those day people, which was an impulse I had when I was working late nights. So it's not healthy. It was healthier to put it in a comic than start unplugging vending machines. So I have like recurring things that I'll make notes about, and I do holograph printing. I do like a lot of hand printing. So a lot of those textures, I've done them, or even my students will have like things that they throw away, like the after products. Like we'll be printmaking with my middle school students. They don't know this. And I will take their like blotters or like whatever was just kind of layered, and I'll scan those in and start putting them in stuff. And I do color sometimes, but it was just too much for me at once.
You're drawing so many pages. It's got to be nice to have someone on it.
And I love the DIY. Like, I'm in love with the black and white. For me, it was just, how can I get this out? So I brought, these out just so I could kind of show the mid-process. But I also just like them because I think it's a nice, a book is an investment, and I feel like a floppy has this charm of like being a community piece, and I can be like, oh, I love what you've got. Somebody wants to trade me, I have something. And I like that participatory element. The other thing I love about getting them out is I can see how people react to them. And I get I love day 2 of shows. It's my favorite because people come back and please come back. And they have questions. That's the best part because, you're in it because you love it. And it's I want to share that experience with people. and see what resonates with them. So like getting to do, I still am doing the single issues because I want, you know, I do have, they're asking me about volume 2. It's good problems to have. But, you know, I want to have the experience with the reader. That's what's so lovely about comics. We do this thing together.
Totally.
Like, yeah.
And it's so nice when they come back the next day and buy the next volume.
Yeah, and do that too.
Yeah. And I don't know, I do want to sidebar and ask if you have unplugged a vending machine, because I think you should if you haven't.
I have other peculiarities.
As long as they make you feel good.
They're not destructive. I've been doing this year horrible souvenirs, which is I find trash in cities that's interesting trash, and then it gets gifted to people. So Bethesda netted me many hubcaps, which I brought back in my suitcase.
They're shiny.
Wow.
It was
That's
great.
cool. Great.
Some
gift.
people weren't thrilled to get them, but one of them is going to be turned into a hall pass by one of my fellow teachers. I'll say that's a win.
That's awesome.
So I think you have to play games, and if I think of like something I enjoy, I just like pranking. It's bad. You can't. Like my rules for pranking are: it makes no more waste, it doesn't hurt anyone, and it's like good natured, but it does get a little out of hand.
And like an unplugging a vending machine prank that you think about while you're going home from your really late at night job. So many things that are real can inspire fantasy comics and roles of characters in fantasy comics. And, you know, like there's the idea that fiction is truth and autobio is fantasy, you know? Like people love to write the real things that are happening in fiction comics, and the fake scenario where you ride your bike and you're sad in an autobio comic.
I've done a lot of those.
Yeah, you have done a lot of those. But you know, you do ride your bike sometimes.
I haven't in years.
Yeah, that's
I'm not
true.
kept
So you're
falling.
kind of lying.
Well, yeah, don't you self-edit an autobio? And there are things that, you know, you put it in a fictional space and you've ripped your guts out, you put it down, and then you hid layers behind it, but at least you dealt with it. You moved on from it. Don't ask me what's going on in issues 2 and 3, but if you read it, you know. And I feel like it would be more honest than if I did an autobio about it. And, you know, even just the first issue, I almost lost someone to drug addiction. And I think just like the Fiddler's Green lives in your mind, there's a place in my mind where, like, I think about what life would have been like if things had gone the other way. And it's like infinite Wheatpaste is like if things had gone the other way.
Yeah.
And I had to put those feelings of fear somewhere. And then I wanted to make something beautiful and like make something hopeful about it.
Totally. Yeah. And I think this is a great project for that, you know? Like, Sam, what if, without outing anything you don't want to out, is there anything you've put into your work that is totally true, but you're putting it in this fictional setting, you know? Like anything that you wanted to explore in that way, you know?
Yeah, totally. Well, you know what? Like I said, I mean, I've always kind of identified primarily as, I'm sorry, I'm getting too close again. I've always identified primarily as like autobio, but for a lot of my first 10 years of work, I was kind of constantly trying to escape that. And I would make all these attempts at fiction that were usually like very, very lightly fictionalized versions of my life. And even when I would do genre work, I almost always would end the book by breaking the fourth wall and being like, hey, it's me, Sam. I'm telling you a story right now because I didn't really want to tell you about what's actually going on in my life. But I did that in like 3 books, and then often I would just abandon the book after that because I was like, oh shit, like I knocked over the set. Like,
Is that how the space opera was gonna end?
yeah, I brought space opera along. Space opera was my first attempt at, I guess, what you might call magical realism. Wait, did I bring space opera? I might have not brought space opera. Anyway, space opera. Here it is. Space opera. It kind of started as a bet with my friend when I was like 23 that I was going to write a 1,000-page space opera, but I didn't really know what a space opera was. So it was.
You got kind of far, right?
I got 273 pages in before I gave up. But it was a comic about a spaceman for the most part, but sometimes it would just be like me free associating. I was just like literally drawing as fast as I could. It was like a daily strip. It was about a spaceman, and it was kind of using, I mean, it's a real original, but like using the interiority of space as like kind of a dissociation metaphor, I guess, or whatever. You know, but it became more and more about my life, and then I kind of introduced myself as a character, and then the comic just sort of became an autobio strip about me trying to write space opera and still not really understanding the trappings of the genre. And then the spaceman ends up moving to LA, and then I ended up moving to LA too, and like I kept bumping into the spaceman, but we're both just like living in LA, and you know, we're like going to bookstores and trying to find a job. Anyway, so I got like halfway through the book before I gave up because it wasn't a science fiction book anymore.
But
Anyway.
it was.
But it was.
And Infinite Wheatpaste is also a sci-fi series that has a bunch of different settings, and some feel very like LA, and some feel like it's in space, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know.
What's nice about setting something in space is it's like you're just in a moving version of a hotel. Like you're gonna run into people.
Totally.
You could do fun things, and I think people can get intimidated by that. I love sci-fi and that kind of media, but when I went to like, what do I want to write? I just love the personal moments in those. So I like taking relatable problems, like, you know, just going to a single, you know, making rent. This issue, the Laundry Day special, started with, you know how you get to the end and you've miscalculated your laundry and you end up wearing the stuff somebody gave you that is not as flattering, or maybe you're not as comfortable in. So it just started from like, oh, I started writing this comic while I'm like doing my laundry. What if you got mistaken for somebody else when you're in your, what I call my Laundry Day special, which is I ran out of my wardrobe and have to clean the other stuff. And so, you know, she gets mistaken for a mercenary of some kind and ends up going and like hunting down a cryptid because she really needs to make rent. So, you know, it's relatable problems, but it's fun things. And it's actually, I feel like, really situationally things we all get into. So each issue really does start with like a kernel of something relatable. Like, you know, dealing with a temper tantrum, of course, becomes like an interdimensional incident. And if you've dealt with the wailing and tears of some temper tantrums, it sometimes can feel like the universe is breaking apart. So,
And the character in that's dealing with the temper tantrum, so that's how you say her name,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, she really reminds me of Sam's character, the Enlightened Transsexual, because they're both these like kind of all-seeing goddesses,
Yes.
right? But they both they both deal with the everyday problems that you or I might deal with, like someone being annoying.
well, they're like these goddesses, but I reading through yours, I felt like they both had feet of clay.
Yeah, totally.
And I like relatable goddesses, and you know, who hasn't over idealized a beautiful woman?
Yeah,
Straight up.
Uh,
And who won't again, you know?
wait, something that is just like occurring to me now, kind of like as I'm like comparing and contrasting me and Pidge's works as like, so I feel like with you, and this is also something that this is where I see Love and Rockets and like a lot of like my more conventional like magical realism influences, but like I feel like your stuff is, I feel like the sort of humane mundane stuff is like kind of where the starting point always, and I feel like it's very character driven, and like from what I've read, it like you're seeing the sort of genre stuff kind of intrude on these people's normal lives. And I feel like I'm writing my book, and this is just classic me doing something backwards, but like I feel like I started at maximum crazy, and normal life is sort of slowly intruding on the craziness. Like the arc of my book, like we kind of start out with bending space and time and going crazy, and then as you get into the second half, it's like, oh, my character's getting on Instagram now, and like,
It ends at Starbucks, right?
yeah. And finally, of course, we do my classic thing that I can't resist doing, which is just writing myself into the book. So sorry for doing that again, but I just can't stay out of the spotlight. But I do think that like there was a weird thing that was happening where I just started in surrealist territory, and then just I slowly kind of felt myself getting sucked back into all the banal, mundane shit that I hate.
It's what you have to work out, right?
Yeah, totally. I feel like we started at opposite sides, and then we kind of walked towards each other, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's just, I want to visually represent what's internal. So if you have a story about regret and pain, of course that needs to be time travel. Like what is time travel but about regret?
Yeah, big time.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I got one in there too, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, man, I wish the specter in the staircase, right? I wish I could have
totally.
said the right thing, or I wish I would have done the right thing. And what I think that So is really, fragile in a lot of ways. She's not as powerful as she might seem because she's a person too. Mm-hmm. But really the only thing I gave her was she has the power to fix those moments unbeknownst to herself. And it was like something I wanted to give her. Because it was like, you don't want to put somebody through a similar kind of hurt you've experienced and not help them. And I think I just love these characters too much. Even when they die, I'm like, I'm grieving. And, like most of them are based on, they bear no likeness or resemblance to, but but people I know and love and care about, and it's how I see them. And I see them as a really capable salt of the earth mechanic in space, or a half human ape dad who just trying his best. So those things are there, but it's almost like more of themselves. My one friend who bears no likeness to or resemblance thereof, she had a fiance, and that she's the basis of Lila. Yeah, there you go. And I'll never forget. He said, "I love you, but not as much as Pidge loves you." That's who they are. Like those things, but it's that suspension of disbelief,
right?
Like that image of her has existed to me now over half my life. She is like this powerful, wise, hurt, disastrous, beautiful person, and that's a vivid image to me. And I don't know if I'm doing something that out there because it's real.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. Yesterday we were chatting a little bit about why, like the idea of like why you choose to represent something in fiction, like why you take that route. And I don't know, I think it is like a really sweet way to think about the people in your life and how all these different things that could happen. Like, what if she was a mechanic in space and she had a giant sword or something. You know what I mean? Like something sick. But now I'm thinking about how I would represent my friends in sci-fi. But
See,
I would
now
give
we're getting ideas.
I would give everyone a giant sword. And each of the swords would have different powers, and it would be like in Bleach. But
Gotta make it long again.
I'm not Japanese. Yeah.
Never mind.
But I don't know. Like for each of you, like why do you choose to represent something in fiction and use surrealism to kind of push it, you know? Like if you guys want to elaborate on it.
Well, I'm really interested in Sam's answer because I feel like I could come back, but
Yeah.
what I think is interesting, Sam, you come from out there to home, right? Like
Yeah,
you come
yeah,
to the ground again, and I feel like I come from the ground and then branch it out.
Yeah.
So, I feel like there was a question in there, but where do you feel like the fiction starts or stops for you, maybe? Because I think you kind of weave back through.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the dirty secret of autobio, right, is we're all like lightly fictionalizing, even if we're not doing it consciously, because when you're sharing your memories with the reader, it's always going to be filtered through your own subconscious biases, how you choose to remember things. And of course, as I've gotten better at it, I'm making little editorial choices. So I'm streamlining things, I'm consolidating conversations so it's more readable. So I think just by virtue of doing memoir a long time, you start to sort of employ fictional devices a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I mean, I think I am, every few years I'll try my hand at fiction because I'm always trying to get away from myself a little bit. I mean, writing memoir is kind of grueling work. It's very vulnerable, and getting to have some stuff that is blatantly, flagrantly made up gives you a little bit of a smokescreen, I think, to maintain that vulnerability without totally burning yourself into a husk. So I think that in a lot of ways, fiction just kind of gives you like plausible deniability. Not that anyone's like really coming. I don't know about if people come up to you and are like, okay, so that really like your friend really went to rehab, right? Or like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, like just like how history is written by the victors, I think that nonfiction is a process of editing and deciding what to include and what to exclude.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think fiction is a way you tell the truth. Like you can't actually escape the truth in fiction.
Yeah, far out.
And yeah, like you can't hide there. And I don't want to hide, but I also don't want to go through my life. There are enough autobio comics for me. I'm going to leave it to King Cat and all those guys. And I want to read it. I don't want to write it. I don't.
No, totally.
And I don't want to go through that process of editing through my life. I want to go through of throwing a rock in the water and seeing the ripples. Like I want to throw my stones. I want to do some kind of motion and magic in the world and see how it spreads out and what it becomes, I guess.
Totally. And you write in a really character-driven way, too, right? Like, you kind of, like, the characters
come out.
Yeah, totally. Which makes total sense. Cool.
Could I add one thing?
Yeah, you can.
I also just wanted to say, sorry, this just popped into my head, and it's a little bit of a left turn, but in terms of this book kind of being like a big departure, surrealism-wise, from what I normally do, like, it was also written at a time when my brain was in a very weird place. So I do think that has a lot to do with me kind of deciding to kind of drop a lot of the edifices of autobio. It was the beginning of the pandemic and also like still very early in my transition. And I do, not to get all woo-woo gendery at the end of the panel here, but like, I don't know. I mean, transitioning is like a very psychedelic experience, and like my body was morphing, and I don't know. I felt very Cronenberg. It was the vibe at the time. And then also having the pandemic on top of that, I was already like a couple years in, but still kind of everything was very fresh. And with the pandemic, I was just like not leaving the house, and I was doing a lot of drugs, and like I was like, I don't know. Real life felt very fractured, and well, I'm trying to come up with a synonym for surreal, but surreal, and I don't know. This sort of vein of writing felt more naturally to me. There was no way for me to really do grounded autobio at the time because I just wasn't grounded. You know, I was like going crazy.
That makes sense.
But that's like that truth in that fiction.
Yeah,
See,
totally.
Like it cuts right through.
Yeah. You get it.
And then by the time you were finishing up the book and you were feeling more grounded, you were like, time to bring myself as a character into this?
Yeah, well, I had to go
Yeah.
back to work, and it sucks.
Yeah, totally.
It's hard to talk about anything else.
Yeah,
Your job sucks.
when your job sucks or your roommate sucks, like there's nothing.
Game over.
It's game over.
Yeah.
We have like 10 more minutes.
Wow, crazy.
So, yeah, we kind
Okay.
of.
Including Q&A, are we doing that?
I would love to. If you guys would like to do Q&A, we could do Q&A.
Alright,
That
keep
would
riffing,
be,
whatever-
or we can keep
whatever's
riffing.
fine.
Yeah, if you
I
guys
got a
have
hand.
questions, then yeah.
All right, I'm feeling the catharsis, which you're really seeking,
Yeah.
whichever direction you
Yeah.
go, right?
Definitely.
So you want to share the catharsis with others, to let them ride that.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's true in my nonfiction. Oftentimes, now I'm talking about my not surreal stuff, but I mean, when I'm writing a nonfiction piece, often I'll have these kind of very banal moments in my everyday life that feel very cathartic for reasons that are not necessarily easy to articulate. But a lot of my stories are about very normal things that happen to me, you know, like I just have a weird interaction with a stranger, or like I missed the bus or something, and there will be these moments that sort of feel like a confluence of all these like themes that are running through my life that will feel very emotionally significant from the inside. And then my goal through storytelling is to kind of try to, find a way to sort of let you see all those threads and like kind of understand, kind of reverse engineer that catharsis for a reader who's like not necessarily privy to all my internal thoughts. So that's something I think a lot when I'm writing nonfiction. I think the same is true of fiction. I'm just like not as familiar with the territory, but oftentimes it's about finding like a visual metaphor for something that's going on. Like here, there's plenty of kind of like cheesy trans metaphor, you know, like, oh, like there's like a alternate reality, like female non-binary versions of me, you know, or like, oh, I'm time traveling and talking to myself as a kid. I think that's a pretty common trans fantasy, right? Like, so, I think with surrealism, often these like kind of like genre cliches are very fertile, like emotional ground, and they're easy metaphors to reach for. I think to kind of find a shorthand for those catharsis feelings, without just being like, yeah, I missed the bus and it was so crazy. But I mean, a lot of my comics are that, you know.
And you got splashed by the puddle by the bus.
Yeah. I was like
Yeah.
sliding doors vibes every day, you know.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that we share that DIY background and we
Yeah.
continue it as a practice. I think it's a great way to refine your practice. A lot of people don't think you've made anything worth making until you've got it in a binding, and no. It's like there's a great experience about that handling of the paper and that getting those ideas out there. I'm going to get on my soapbox because I didn't wedge it in. I'm going to get the shoehorn out. I think nearly daily, especially when I'm tired and I'm like, do I want, like, because I want to go and draw, but sometimes we're tired.
Yeah.
And I think daily of Jack Kirby's, if you want to do it, you'll do it, and you'll do it any way you can. And that's like my mantra. And keep making those DIY comics, keep, getting your friends into comics, and keep sharing. Like, it's about sharing. And I think if it was just something that I thought would only be for me, like it is, I am the audience. I could just keep it to myself and I could go to my day job. But I also think there are things that I want to share with people, and I'm excited to do that. So yeah, I just want to get my soapbox for that.
Yeah.
Make comics. I'll swear, since it's my hobby. Make comics, goddammit.
Making comics more than anything else is an endurance test. They take forever to make, they take forever to print, and they take forever to mail to different bookstores.
Yeah.
And I think self-publishing...
You can read them really fast.
But then you can read them in 2 seconds. It's like the opposite of a tattoo, where it takes 2 seconds to get a tattoo, and then it's on your body forever. You know, kind of.
Yeah.
Where you spend 6 months drawing a comic, and someone reads it in 5 minutes in front of you, and then puts it down.
Please come to my table and do that.
Please, yeah. I honestly, I think that's cool. I'm like, thanks for reading.
I'm not. No, I'll be sincere.
Yeah, me too.
Hard to tell.
I don't know if anyone else had any questions about it. I think we're also really keen to speak about comics making and
Yes.
This is more like asking for clarification. Like, I thought this was an interesting perspective. Would you say that like memoir, because there's that self-edit aspect, it's more like a subtractive process, whereas putting parts of your own life into fiction, that's more like an additive process?
that's really insightful and I'm going to steal it.
Yeah.
Please, it's your idea.
Yeah, I like that because I think when you're in that process of taking out, you're editing, and maybe it's that when you're bringing in, you're sharing. And I like to be more in a sharing space than that withholding space. Yeah, there's one in the back. Can I call?
Yeah, you
Hi.
can.
I guess mine is more of a meander compliment for both you and Sam. I discovered your work probably around the pandemic.
Oh shit! Nice. Oh, this is great time to do it.
And I just find the grittiness of it to be so like queer affirmative and very gender.
Cool, man.
Though I know you and I are different genders.
No. I dig it. Thank
But
you.
your work is very gender, and I really appreciate it. Like, I know I'm less familiar with your work, but it's been really wonderful getting to like meet you a little bit here and there, like working with episodes and stuff.
Thank you for volunteering.
Yeah.
I love the Billy. I love TXE. Thank you. That's so sweet. I'm glad it resonated. You know. Yeah.
Checking the time.
Made my hat fall off.
Perfect. Good. We got time.
Yeah. Any more, Craig?
Right.
Alright, so this is gonna touch on memoir. I feel like I've always been kind of afraid to do memoir. It's like knowing friends who do drugs and they're like, "Oh no, dude, you're just gonna go on this trip." I'm like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm kind of scared."
You can just take a half.
A quarter.
Like, I always get the sense, so this is going off of vibes alone, that like doing memoir ends up kind of like in some ways reframing, recontextualizing, rewriting a life experience, and so you get to like see the story you created rather than the story that just like haunted you. And I'm wondering if there is like experiencing, the other side of that experience, and messing with the surreal, if there's something else that kind of happens, if that is your experience doing memoir, if that translates to art. I've never done, I've done acid, I haven't done memoir.
Yeah, just say no.
It's
I can do these drug riffs all night.
it's easier to do acid than write a memoir, I think.
Yeah, F only,
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, I tried. Yeah, I don't know. Do them at the same time, and it might have a. I don't know. I'm gonna cut myself off on that one. Yeah. I mean, well, now I just keep wanting to continue the drug metaphor. I mean, it is an introspective experience. Word up. Yeah, I mean, look, I've got a lot of memoir comics about doing acid. I was trying to not to talk about it.
Go.
But, yeah, no, but I mean, I do think that, there's a reason that, a lot of creatives get into this stuff. I was certainly influenced by a lot of the, 60s underground hippies. I mean, what was the question again?
Like, as far as like some of the effects of doing comics, do you find that there is a different like space that your mind occupies
Oh.
when you're doing more surreal or fantasy-based work?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot more fun to do surreal stuff. I mean, it's just objectively more fun, I think, to draw outer space than it is to draw me crying in a bathtub. But just sometimes that's my job. But yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think it does. It does sort of unlock. I mean, it's my writing processes for fiction and nonfiction aren't that different, but I do think that it unlocks a more abstract way of thinking when you are dealing in surrealism. But when you're working in fiction, anytime I mean, the idea is, I think, right, to hang on to these sort of truths and these sort of ideas from your real life that you want to work out on the page, but you're looking for ways to either illuminate or obscure them, whatever you're trying to do, whether that's to find a metaphor that's, fruitful, or whether it's to, find a cool space battle to kind of like get the reader's guard down so that they're not necessarily like judging you.
I love to get somebody's guard down and then just
Yeah.
sucker punch them.
Totally.
Just like, I want comics break your heart because you love them.
Mm-hmm.
As like, I want to break your heart a little bit sometimes. And so like just delivering that, I brought your guard down and now I'm really going to hit you with the thing that was on my mind the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
And when it's a page turn. Jeez.
But, I did a talk a couple of days ago about closure in comics, like between each panel. And there's a closure in the experience of sharing a comic with a person too. Like even from the book to the person, there's that closure because you made those things happen. And I think that it's nice to make a comic, and everyone should, because there's a healing experience with that closure. I didn't know I was coming to therapy today, but I think that they're a beautiful thing and they're a participatory thing inherently. And I just think even if you're not just doing autobio, you're sharing something vulnerable. And that act of vulnerability and that act of sharing make things easier to not just talk about, but easier to accept.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stuff that was in Wheatpaste, I think I feel better about them now. Like it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
Like I feel like Wheatpaste has taken a lot of hurt out of some things, and it's like there's a lot of joy in it, and it's like a very playful comic, but also I think making it was an act of healing.
And it can even enact healing in other people too who read it, and I'm sure they've come up to you and been like, I was feeling the same way too after something, maybe not even the same situation happened, but it's comics can do a lot.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I think we are cut for time.